Welcome to the CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast. This is the podcast at the intersection of international education and climate action. I'm CJ Tremblay, and today we're talking about what the heck CANIE is and how it came to be, and also why. I'm going to be chatting with CANIE co-founders and my friends, Elsa Lamont and Pii-Tulia Nikula. If you missed it, our first episode was about the reality of the climate crisis and what we're up against. And honestly, it was a surprisingly hopeful conversation considering the heaviness of the topic. That conversation served as a solid foundation for what we're trying to achieve here, which is really to provide some context about the reality of the climate situation and how it connects to international education. That context was provided by Lynn Doe and Elsa Lamont, who is so awesome, she's joining us again. The common thread there was Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, by whom Lynn, Ailsa, and I were all trained as climate reality leaders. I'm super excited to introduce our two guests today. We're just going to get right to it. Elsa Lamont is an international education professional with 30 years of experience spanning economic development, cross-cultural communications, university leadership, and social innovation in more than 70 countries. She founded Pomegranate Global in 2016 as a consultancy to support international offices, institutions with their sustainability and overall internationalization strategies. She was recently appointed as a senior fellow for 2020 and 2021 at NAFSA, the Association for International Educators, to support NAFSA in its aim to proactively define, develop, support, and integrate sustainable practices in its work and the field of international education. Pii-Tulia Nikula is an international education management and policy scholar from New Zealand. In addition to academic publishing and teaching, she engages actively with practitioners in order to enhance the research practice dialogue. And lately, she's been focused a lot on the climate crisis and its possible solutions. Super looking forward to talking to both of these women.
Ladies, so glad we could do this. Welcome to the CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast. How do you feel now that your nonprofit baby has its own podcast?
The baby's growing up.
Yeah, I guess, when we actually got started, we didn't really imagine this actually coming to life so well as it has. So yeah, it's awesome.
Awesome. So where are each of you right now for our listeners?
I'm in Melbourne, Australia.
And I'm in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand. So
we're both in summer, or just coming into summer.
Amazing. I am in Vancouver, where it is decidedly not the summertime. It is raining and entering rainy season. So this was the podcast that was supposed to be our first podcast. We were always very excited to launch the podcast, and we were going to introduce our listeners to CANIE and our CANIE co-founders. And then we had a little bit of a climate change hiccup. And Pii-Tulia, you were caught in a once in a 200-year sort of weather event. And so, one of the things that we always want to hear is people's climate story. And so I think as one of our co-founders, I would love to hear your climate story. And I imagine that it might have changed a little bit. And then we'll hear your climate story after, Elsa.
Yeah. So we can't obviously connect any single events to climate change, but obviously what I had to go through and my family had to go through is definitely something we'll be seeing more and more in the future if we don't start taking rapid action. So my house got hit by a landslip caused by this kind of massive weather event and a lot of rain in where I live, so we needed to be evacuated. And at the moment, obviously, the house and the works around it are taking a lot of my time. So obviously, there's a lot of individual kind of additional time and effort and money that needs to go into it, as well as if we think about at the national level, global level. If we don't start taking action, these type of events will become more frequent all the time. I can tell you that nobody wants to be in that type of situation. And obviously Elsa has her own similar story to share as well. So for me, I guess when I first started hearing about climate change, it was difficult to make a connection between who I am and, this type of issue. So we sometimes feel living in developed countries that we, it doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on us, but I don't think anybody is safe. So we'll all be, having to really, and our kids will have to bear, this type of the cost of climate change in different ways. I think I was always putting climate change in the too hard basket in many ways, and I thought somebody else will deal with it. My spouse he's been really engaged for a long time, and he has been whispering in my ear saying, this is something you should also do something about. And I've been always kind of saying, I'm too busy, somebody else will deal with it. And it was kind of quite late. So in 2018, when I actually started thinking that, no, there's nobody else, we all have to contribute as well. And really, that's when I started to educate myself of the issue and seeing how I could connect climate action with the international education sector as well.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that you've been through a lot, and we're so glad that you and your family are safe. And I'm so glad that we were able to be with us today and have this conversation. Ailsa, your climate story. We saved this for today's episode with Pii-Tulia.
Yeah, so, I echo a lot of what Pii-Tulia said there. I was concerned about climate issues probably ever since I was a teen when I studied abroad in Germany, and it was a much more prominent issue there at that time than it was in Scotland where I grew up. And but I still wasn't really putting a lot of focus on it or thinking about it a great deal. About 10 years ago, when I still lived in North Queensland, I had my house up for sale because I was moving to Melbourne, and we got hit by Cyclone Yasi, which was, for people who don't remember that one, it was the size of Katrina, but luckily it wasn't a direct hit on the town, but it was still pretty bad and damage to my house. And also the tail end of it came down south and caused some mass flooding in Melbourne, which took out the roof of the house I was moving into the next week. So, and that's when it was pretty bizarre because the distance between Townsville and Melbourne it's a bit like Florida and Boston or something like that, to give you a bit of context. So not particularly lucky. And again, like Pii-Tulia, I'm not saying that was definitely climate change caused, but it was, I suppose what climate change does is it increases the intensity and the frequency of these kinds of events and means that more and more of us are likely to be affected by them in future. And even my house wasn't impacted nearly as badly as Pii-Tulia's, but the disruption, the financial effects, actually I still feel to this day, 10 years later. So, it's, even if you're lucky enough to live in a rich country with good infrastructure where you can get kind of back on your feet, these things still have massive implications. And of course, there are lots of parts of the world where people are going to be much more severely affected. But I didn't connect it with climate change at the time. So that wasn't actually part of my kind of journey. It was more that through my work, I was heading up an international area at a university, and we started looking at social innovation as well. So I was involved in bringing that in as a kind of key strategy for the university, and we were looking at it as a way to make students more engaged, to give them a purpose, so to get them studying abroad or working on internships or on local community projects where they could have a positive social or environmental impact, because we knew that would actually help them to learn better, and it would add kind of meaning and value to their study, but also to our work. And I just got so energized by doing that. I felt like there was purpose in my career again. And some of the key lessons in that whole kind of change-making, social innovation field are around how everyone can make a difference. If you see the need to do something, you should step up and be the one to do something about it. And you shouldn't underestimate your own agency and your own power to do something. And as I was dealing with all that, I was like, well, I need to absorb these lessons myself. And I had a colleague, Rob McDonald, who did some great work on the carbon footprint of international education. We were in a multi-campus institution and traveling all the time. I mean, there were days when I was flying, 2 or 3 times a day to get between campuses. And I was like, gee, I need to look at this. Like, I really need to do something about this, because everything was too discombobulated, and I felt I needed to kind of bring it into a cohesive whole. And that meant that I had to actually step up and bloody do something.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing your climate stories. And there's a lot, and it's obviously the theme I hear from both of you is you're like, someone else might do it. I didn't think it was going to be me. And here you are, having co-founded CANIE, which I think has impacted positively a lot of people in this sector. And I have a question for you, because I've heard your individual stories, but I kind of want to hear more about your story of the two of you. I actually have no idea how you met and how you found each other. And so, yeah, whoever wants to take that one, yeah. I'm excited for this.
Well, we both attended one of the international education conferences in Australia in 2018. I remember there was one session about sustainability, nothing about really climate related, but about sustainability. But I was quite disappointed that the whole session was about social sustainability, which is important, but there was not even a mention or reference to climate change. So after the session in the questions, I did stand up and ask a question, which was, I think, followed by Elsa and her question about the same topic as well. And actually at that conference, I was just too busy to connect. So I went to LinkedIn to find Elsa after the conference and sent her a message, asking, would you like to have a discussion and see, if we could do something together as well? Because at that point, you did definitely feel a bit, siloed, and you weren't sure if there was anybody else who thought this topic was important. So you felt a little bit, in a way that, is this completely irrelevant? So it was very important to find somebody who, was that kind of a friendly voice and actually thought that this was an important conversation to have. So I think that was the beginning of it. And we, in 2019, we kind of started writing. I think we wrote a few blogs together and had a couple of conference proposals and abstracts as well. So again, we can connect using virtual opportunities as well. And Elsa, I think you came to New Zealand that year as well to co-present at the conference. So.
Yeah, and I think the first time we actually met in person was in Brisbane, so at the climate reality training.
Okay, yeah.
Al Gore ran, but we'd been, as you say, we'd connected and online, and we'd Zoomed and stuff. And but then we were both at the climate reality training in Brisbane, and we managed to it was so busy. I think we managed to catch up in one of the breaks for 15 minutes. It was like, oh, okay, there you are. So by the time I came to New Zealand and we co-presented at the NZIEC, we at least knew what each other looked like. But yeah, it was brilliant to get that contact. And as Pii-Tulia said, that kind of validation that you weren't crazy. I'd done a few sessions by that stage. I'd had a number of sessions knocked back by different conferences, or you'd get a poster somewhere. API was really good. I'd done one session at API, and that had led me to some people like Kevin McGann, who'd said that he was really interested. So I knew there was somebody in France that was keen. But then when Pii-Tulia contacted me, I was like, oh, this is brilliant. And it was so good to, like two voices is much more powerful. It's more than double the power that one voice has. And then we started adding different people. So Kevin, and there was Marianne in France who'd spoken at an EAIE, and a few others. We started collaborating and kind of blitzing conferences with proposals to just try and get the topic further up the agenda.
Got it.
That was the kind of the core. So
that's amazing, because what I heard there is like you guys saw each other around, and then Pii-Tulia like just slid into your DMs on LinkedIn, which is great. And so that's awesome. And so it sounds like, in terms of like the actual concept of this organization, so when you talk about like Kevin and other founding members and blitzing conferences, was this a group of people at the time when you were reaching out with where you said, okay, no, like we have this Climate Action Network for International Educators, we have a name, or did it, you guys had a group of people and then named yourself? Like, I'm super curious.
Yeah, I don't think there was any name, but I mean, Elsa is better too. This was more Elsa's baby, this network, and having a CANIE and something else, or something that we could call as our own group and so on. But it definitely was the very early days. I guess, Daisy, you had an idea of how it could look like, Elsa, so maybe you can just kind of explain your initial thinking around it as well. And the first launch we did in Europe.
And we did a kind of soft launch in New Zealand too, didn't we? That it was more that absolutely it was not a case of, oh, we have this network now. It was more that just like we had an email group with a few people who would talk to each other, and it was kind of like a virtual hug, just to keep a bit of moral support. And Eddie West in California, he was with UC then, he was fantastic as well, and going, when can if I can lend the weight of my institution to your efforts, that would be great too. And it just kind of organically happened, I think, as we had more and more conversations. We're like, we need something to hang this on. We feel that there's the kind of kernel of something. Maybe it would be great to have a more formal network so that we could approach the bigger organizations and associations. And then, I mean, it was literally kind of back of a fag packet stuff. Me and Pii-Tulia were going to be presenting in Auckland, and we're like, it'd be great to have a website. So, okay, we need a website. We need to have a name. And we just kind of came up with a name, got a very basic website together, and told people at the conference that we'd launched. And then we had a meeting in Helsinki at EAIE, and it's just kind of rocketed from there, really. So I suppose we must have hit on the need for something.
So that's a great segue to like the next question before this, because you sort of alluded to this, where you'd had one session on sustainability in an event, but had you heard chatter at all about climate action in the sector, or is this kind of on the lowdown and a thing no one really wanted to talk about? Because it's taken off, and we're getting so much support and encouragement and positive feedback, and we're not only being accepted into sort of sustainability, into events for proposals, being asked to keynote, but before, like, it was challenging, right?
Yes, I think when I really started to look into it in 2018, there was nothing really, almost no, I couldn't really find any even blog posts about the topic, and really, the international education connection to it. There were some academic papers out, but really very little really looking at that specific international education and climate action connection itself, and it does make you question yourself. It's like, well, why do people not care, and also for me, I had worked a lot around social sustainability, and I felt like I needed to educate myself first about the science behind it and the issue before I could really write anything. So, and also, in my discussions with international education professionals, so sometimes I said, my research in 2019 will be really starting to focus on this topic. And a lot of people couldn't make the connection. So they were asking, well, what does this have to do with international education? So people couldn't really see, the emissions related to international mobility. And it was not really on the agenda. And Elsa, obviously, because she started a little bit earlier, would have also experiences of sending. I did as well, actually, probably in 2018, I did send abstract to a conference about the topic, but it was not seen to be related to international education to be accepted. So that was also rejected. And then the year after was actually one of the big themes of the conference. So that kind of shows how fast things change from, something that's not relevant to something that's kind of top of the agenda.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. So on the topic a little bit about climate change and sustainability. So we get this question a lot. I've had this question a lot because, institutions talk a lot about sustainability. Their social sustainability is a huge part of what institutions talk about. And so why choose climate change? Like, why focus only on climate change for CANIE?
So it's such a big topic, and I've heard a lot of people talk about this as well, because universities are putting a lot of work into their SDG framework and strategies, which is obviously fabulous. But there is a really kind of simple reason why the focus on climate. Two parts. One, because of the urgency of the climate piece. All of the SDGs are important, but none of them have that kind of ticking clock element, ticking time bomb element that climate change does. And the other one is just that we have so many levers to pull, direct levers we can pull to actually make a difference within international education. One, because we have, our business models are basically so carbon intensive and built around flying everywhere. And two, because we have direct access to international students and outbound students that we can build their eco-literacy. So it's the time and it's the fact we can do something.
Okay, perfect. So you actually touched on something there that I wanted to dig into a little bit more. So CANIE is sort of the climate action network for international educators. We are in international education, and everything that we've ever done pretty much centers students. And so I wanted to pick your brain a little bit and ask, because our job is to create global citizens. That's what we do. Global citizens to solve big problems. And so why is it that CANIE focuses specifically on international educators or practitioners?
Well, quite often, we get this discussion, of the positive handprint that institutions have because they educate students and so on, as well as sometimes expectations for students to do more, international students to do more. But really, we have to walk the walk as well as organizations, as practitioners, and we have to have a very good reflection on our own footprint as well. So our emissions, we have to make sure that we do take tangible action as well, rather than just ask others to do more. I was saying we're going to be, educating our students to be good, global citizens. And also our students have not caused the problem we have at hand. It is us, our organizations and so on. So we really have to start showing leadership, taking responsibility for our own emissions and footprint. And then that's going to be together with the positive handprint we can do and really see positive action taking place. But I think just doing one, just focusing on the students would be quite a lazy way of seeing it, but we really have to, really invest our own resources and time and money to show that we're also taking a leadership role here.
Yeah, and if I could just add, I think, we're all in this business because we understand the value and importance of international education, and we don't want to take that opportunity away from students. So I think, but concentrating on how we can make the kind of back-end infrastructure that supports student mobility and internationalization, if we can make that more sustainable, then we can really contribute to, we can add a lot of value while still maintaining and supporting the purpose of what we do. And we know that not every international study experience is transformative, but it has the potential to be, and it often is. And if we can still support that, but also use it as a kind of teachable moment for students so that they can understand the impact of their study abroad while we're doing what we can behind the scenes to like walk the talk, then I think we've got a nice kind of sweet spot there.
I think, yeah, when we did our summits, one of the things, so even though the Climate Action Network for International Educators is for international educators and practitioners, like we're trying to provide resources, open access to information so that people can start affecting change now, take on agency within their own institutions. There's the sector-wide work that we're doing. But one of the things that I love is the sort of, while, educating students is part of the whole process and we are the educators, but there is this whole other element to it. And what we did in the summits, and that was a really important part, was still elevating the voice of students, right? There are a lot of practitioners who don't always see students. I almost never interact with students. I'm deeply passionate about creating global citizens, but I don't often get to interact with students. And so amplifying the voices, like there are students, it's their future, and we have a responsibility to act. We can't really wait for them. When you talk about why climate, it's the timeline is so short to affect change. We can't really wait for them to be holding the purse strings. They certainly have, like students have a tremendous amount of power. But they don't always have the ability to sort of enact the change right away. And if the people who are holding the purse strings would make those changes, then the students don't have to sort of leverage that power all the time, and they can affect sort of multiple other things as well. And so I think that that's something that I really wanted to make the distinction of why it is for the international educators and the practitioners, but we are acutely aware of the voice of the students, and we do often sort of bring that forward. Okay. So in terms of the vision for CANIE, I mean, this is a big question. We talk about these at our strategic meetings all the time, but sort of as of today, early to mid-December, where's CANIE where's the vision for CANIE? And what do we sort of want CANIE to be? That's just a big one. I'm going to do the thing where I'm just going to like be a teacher and be like, Pii-Tulia, tell me, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, obviously what we want to do is we want to support the international education sector to take action. And I guess our vision for the future is to have a net carbon zero, climate conscious international education sector where climate change and climate action is embedded into all institutional strategies and all the everyday work we do. So it's not just a kind of a niche area to think about, once a year, but it's actually something we do consider systematically. And we obviously want, what Elsa was saying, that, we do want to give these international education opportunities to our students. Obviously, we can be doing them in different ways, but some mobility is likely to happen. So, but at least we'd like to see a net carbon zero as in the near future, where at least all of those emissions would be offsetted if, and obviously to see a reduction in the overall emissions as well. So I guess for us is to see that kind of a net carbon zero and climate conscious international education sector. I'm not going to put a year on it, but Elsa, you might want to say 2025.
I love it. That's beautiful.
2025 sounds good, but I mean, I think just to build on that, you know, my vision for CANIE is that we make ourselves obsolete because we're no longer needed, because everyone's actually done just what Pii-Tulia outlined. And so I see our role as looking at, you know, how we support and enable the sector to do more. And my dog's just rummaging around in the background. Apologies for that. So I see our role as how do we support the sector to take action, but also how do we drive it? How do we maybe be those kind of rabble rousers who bring people together and actually facilitate the conversations that need to happen?
I love that. I love the idea of like working ourselves out of a job, a volunteer job, but out of a job no less. And so I kind of love that. And I net carbon zero by year to be determined. We're working on it, but it's going to be aggressive. And so that's awesome. Thank you to both of you. So in terms of how, you know, what's next for CANIE, what impact are we hoping to have in the short term? And then sort of building onto that, I know there's a conversation about how people can get involved. And so I do want to talk about that, but I think maybe starting first with like, what are we expecting to do in the short term? Like what's next for us? And Pii-Tulia, I'm going to throw to you while Ailsa is tending to her puppy.
Yes, obviously it's been an amazing year, starting from almost nothing and now having this, you know, network of people who are really keen, engaged, interested in contributing and learning more as well. So we want to help, you know, support the sector and the people who are kind of advocating within their institutions and wanting to play a leadership role and start, you know, having these discussions. And so for us, obviously, it's to try to share as many, you know, best practices, resources, solutions as we can, help people to understand how to get started. We're really still at early days. So a lot of institutions and international offices have not really done much. So they have to understand, well, how do we get started? What are the first steps? And, you know, what's after that to make it easier as well for institutions. And it's really, you know, to have this kind of networks and ability to find like-minded people, because by having those kind of case studies to share, it's easier to also drive change within your institutions. And so I guess we just want to make this more mainstream. And I think we have already started that journey this year, but I think next year, again, it's really, you know, kind of expanding and also geographically expanding to countries that we haven't necessarily been very active at the moment, so that we have a really like a truly global network of people working together and helping them by sharing resources and information, knowledge. So that's, I guess, what I'm seeing for next year.
Yeah, I think it's definitely been impressive when I look at the scope and geographical spread of sort of the network that it's achieved in, I guess, like a little over a year, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's been amazing. And I know that we still have more to grow into, which is exciting. So Ailsa, I guess I would throw to you on like, how can people get involved with CANIE? What kind of commitment is necessary at different levels of engagement?
Yeah, so first of all, you can go to the CANIE website and you can sign up there. It's free. We don't bombard you with too much information, but we will, use your email if you sign up to inform you about events and new resources as they come on stream. The new website, which of course, CJ, you're massively instrumental in, will be coming at some point early next year, and that should have a lot of new resources, which will be really useful, including a how to get started and climate action guide, which is on my to write list. And but also you can follow us.
You're on the hook.
You can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn. We've also got a LinkedIn discussion forum. So I'm sure we can add all those links in the show notes, but also you can find them on the CANIE website. But probably one of the most accessible ways is if you didn't join us at our summits, you can go to the CANIE YouTube channel where you can actually check out all of the recordings from different sessions, and they're really clearly chunked up so that you can just go right to the session that you're interested in.
Great. So for those of you guys listening, basically right now we're still in our first year and we're just determining how we're going to activate sort of globally, but informing yourself. There's so much great content. There's so many great presentations that we saw at the summits. Great information in terms of everything from traveling to embedding things into the curriculum, and sort of just even looking at the operations of international offices. So we've had a really great deal of helpful content. I know I learned a lot from every single one of those summits. And so in terms of the commitment, there's really not a lot beyond educating oneself, but we will be activating our global network in the future. And there will be plans for regional and potentially even sort of depending, sort of even smaller regionals. So we talk about like big regions, but there may be small specific committees and chapters that we want to activate. And so that'll be really exciting.
Yeah, and I should have said, that this is a kind of grassroots volunteer organization. You can contribute as much or as little time as you can, as you have available. And, for example, the Europe Summit that we just ran there, that there was a kind of core team of maybe 16 people in Europe, plus the broader CANIE team that put on that event. And, everyone in that group was just somebody who got in touch with CANIE, either early before we officially became the network or once we'd become a network, and just said, look, I want to be involved in some way. And people contributed how, it was a bit communist really, to each according to their ability.
Into it.
And we've got a stack of people now who I haven't had time to get back to, who contacted us after the last summit to say, we want to get involved. I think there was somebody in Venezuela, it's people all over the world. And so we basically will grow like where people tell us they're prepared to get involved. And CJ, you just contacted me. Was it through LinkedIn? Or?
Oh yeah, I'm sure I did. I just found your email and I was like, no, I'm inserting myself into this.
And and thank God you did, because you've been incredible. The energy that you've brought to the whole group from these podcasts and your amazing other skills that are just too numerous to mention. So that this is really we have to stay open. We have to stay collaborative. That's the whole point. We want to be open source. We are not going to become some kind of closed organization, even though we have become an actual not-for-profit, because that just allows us to be a bit more organized.
And so in the face of what we're trying to achieve, what do you think are the key challenges of the work we've got ahead of us? And Pii-Tulia, you look like.
But obviously, as a CANIE, so it's always good to emphasize, we're all volunteering our time and resources. And for us, obviously, there's people work full time and then, they still contribute. And we have excellent talent. We could do more. Having more resources as well. So I think for next year as well, we will be looking at different ways of finding financial resources, people who are willing to sponsor the type of work we do. There's still lack of research as well in this area, and we would like to conduct our own to share it again. And because we want to keep as much as possible as open access, then obviously there will be certain limitations as well of our ability to do so. So for us, it's really obviously to do more, and we do need to find also more financial resources to do so as well. So I guess that's the key challenge. We have an amazing group of people, and we're always welcoming more people. We want to have more diversity from different backgrounds, different geographical locations, and so on for CANIE. But it's really to be able to do more as a volunteering nonprofit organization. That's something that's obviously a challenge for the type of work we can do. So anybody who's interested in sponsoring us or our event.
I was just going to say, this is great. I'm going to take a minute and be like, are you listening? And are you part of a service provider or organization that wants to support climate action and international ed? You should reach out to Ailsa or the CANIE organization at info@can-ie.org and tell us you would like to be a sponsor of this podcast or a sponsor of our sort of organization, and we will get back to you.
Ailsa, and we obviously welcome different types of contributions. So it could be helping us to advertise and market, what CANIE is doing, or helping us with, other type of services we need and so on. So anybody who's interested in, please get in touch, and we're happy to have a discussion.
Yeah. And other challenges, Elsa, that you're seeing for CANIE as we want to sort of achieve what we're going to do?
Yeah, I think, those ones that Pii-Tulia outlined are obviously the big ones, but another one is we don't want to fall into the trap that a lot of not-for-profits fall into of trying to replicate work that's already being done elsewhere. Like, we see ourselves as kind of catching the bits that fall between the cracks. And so, for example, when it comes to surveying student attitudes to climate change or looking at rankings around that, we don't really want to be setting those things up ourselves. But what we do want to do is work with the organisations that are already doing that work and get them to think about ways that they can maybe inject international education more into their core work. So I think finding those opportunities is a challenge. And we've also set ourselves a huge challenge of working title, running a kind of super summit next year, where we actually try and get the sector, the key players across the sector, to think globally and look at what they can do, whether on a national or a global level, to put climate at the heart of their work. So, we're not short on ambition or tasks.
Yeah, true. It's funny when I think about the challenges. Obviously, everything that you're talking about resonates, and we've talked about these in a number of meetings. And how do we solve these problems? And then, in terms of the challenges of the work that we face, and there is also the general resistance to the sector, given the fact that it is a model that is based on a lot of flying. Ailsa, you said this beautiful thing that I'm going to quote you for a minute. You'd said there's a huge elephant in the room. You said this in an interview, and it's like, the huge elephant in the room is that we're all binge flyers and our whole sector is built on the need to fly people. And that's the truest truth, right? And I think that we'll talk more about this in an upcoming episode about attitudes around flying in the sector. And I know that there's so many people who are struggling right now being grounded and not being able to travel. And you think about, if it is the case that our sector is going to transform, it may be the case that this isn't the job for people who want to travel and be like globetrotters. And so that's a very real resistance that, you know, we see, and also the fear that doing more virtual work means that there will be fewer bums in seats and less revenue, and that sort of increasing access to international experiences, whether they're virtual or in person, when we've spent, you know, the better part of several decades saying that it had to be in person to be impactful, and there was no other way to develop those international competencies. And I think there's a lot of really interesting work being done, but I do think a challenge that we are going to face, but you know, we've had such positive response to the organization so far and the work that we're trying to achieve. There are people all over the place that believe in being able to transform and develop those global citizens in a new way of doing business. But I do think that that's a thing that we kind of have to face sometimes. And I'm like, oh, are people going to just think that I don't want them to fly? Like, that's not what I'm saying.
No, I mean, and the phrase that I keep coming back to now is like mindful travel, like make it count, do it less, do it when you have to, cluster multiple reasons around one trip, choose the lowest emission possible route, and then use it as an opportunity to maybe talk to people about the whole problem of climate change, and then at least offset as a kind of, you know, hand sanitizing thing at the end. Not that that's a solution on its own, but, you know, it's, I think making all of us more careful and conscious about the way that we choose to travel while still recognizing that it has value is the way I was raised.
I also think that was part of my initial reluctance to be involved, because I knew what it was going to mean for me personally as well, and that I would need to be accountable, because, you know, I used to love to travel as well, and long haul flights and so on meant that my own personal emissions were way beyond where they should have been, as well as my historical emissions. So I think that was the initial, you know, having to actually quite critically reflect on your own behavior, and knowing that if this was something I wanted to be involved in, I would need to change my personal ways of operating as well. And that was like a difficult internal dialogue I had to go through as well. And yeah, so it has meant that I have changed my own behaviors as well. And it's, you know, sometimes it's baby steps, sometimes it's big steps, especially during COVID-19, as we don't have to go anywhere. So I haven't even left my town in a year now. So, but, you know, so it's really thinking about internally and externally, what can we do to change our own behaviors, and what can we do to change the behaviors within our industries and communities as well. So
Yeah,
it's so hard. When I lost my Qantas Platinum status, I was distraught, and I knew I had to do it. I knew I had to reduce that travel, but I loved it. I did, you know. It is bloody hard, and I'm sure that is part of why people don't really want, have been a bit resistant to doing something.
Yeah. And, you know, Pii-Tulia, and that was really, really well said. And just having to like reckon with, and Ailsa, I know you talked about like your past carbon footprint as well. I think about my past carbon footprint, and I think that that'll be and I think that it will be throughout all, you know, when we talk about partnerships, when we talk about conferences, when we talk, all of these things will be the nature of the way that we operate as practitioners will be, but those mindsets I find are a challenge. But it, you know, in terms of taking action to make change, I would say thank you to the both of you for really getting, I mean, it's transformed the way that I, and made me realize what my priorities are in terms of the work that I do. And it has sort of reinforced that I am, like, even if I don't travel, I am like super interested in this business and transforming students with those global competencies and developing those global citizens. And I think that that's a really valuable thing for someone to realize. And I think that starting CANIE and the work that you guys have done to date is like personally inspiring. I think it's really starting to change the dialogue in the industry. So I just wanted to thank you so much both for taking the time today to be here. Pii-Tulia, I'm so glad you're doing okay and that we're glad to have you here. So thank you to you both. Any parting last words?
Thank you, CJ. I'm so glad, Pii-Tulia, that you got in touch with me and that we have been able to do something that is hopefully useful. It feels amazing.
Yeah, and it's been amazing to see how CANIE has grown from, a small group of people to, this, number of people. And we have been able to bring in, and you have been able to bring in so much, extra talent and skills and experience and, passion, and that has really taken the whole CANIE to a completely different level. So it's been an awesome year for CANIE, and it's been also great to see how we've been able to kind of develop trust and understanding without actually ever meeting in person. So it just kind of shows you how even in this digital space, you can have this amazing network of people working collaboratively, even if most of us have only seen us in Zoom. So so from that perspective, 2020 has been a good year, but it might be challenged in other areas of life. But yeah, thank you everybody, and thank you CJ again for running the podcast for us.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's listening today. If you haven't subscribed, please do so already. If you have already subscribed, you should send this to a couple of friends. And if you are one of those friends who got sent this podcast, please make sure that you jump on that subscribe button, and we'll just continue this beautiful circle. So coming up in a few weeks, we've got some really good content coming up in the next few weeks. We'll be looking at the collaborative online international learning, so COIL, some virtual exchanges. We've got some content coming up on sort of the conference economy and what that looks like in different countries, as well as how to embed sustainability in curriculum. So there's a lot of really cool conversations. If there's anything that you want to hear about, you can tweet CANIE, find us on Instagram, let us know what you want to hear about, and we will be sure to build that content for you. Thanks so much for listening. The CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast is engineered by Diego Mendez, who is based in Vancouver. He edits these episodes together, making us look and sound super professional. And also, he uploads these episodes to wherever you listen or watch this podcast.